Development of air power. As Ezra Bowen recounts in Knights of the Air, Georges Guinemer, a French teenager, spent the days just before World War I idling on the beaches, his eyes fixed on the sky and exotic new flying machines that used the beach as a landing strip. Within months, Guinemer was a member of the French Air Force, a member of a new way of making war by air. It's hard to imagine the mingled terror, fascination, and expectancy those young men experienced a century ago as they took flight for the first time, and as the air forces of the world took flight through their efforts. A new concept grew wings, the concept of strategic and tactical air power. Today I can stand in my yard and crane my eyes heavenward and see as Guinemer did. But today I witness a cluster of gray streaks jetting through the sky far, far above. The modern jets of modern times fly in a different world. I've been interested in the martial application of aviation for a decade or so, beginning at the age of 10, as part of a larger attraction to history and the men and women who have made it. I've read just about every book on the subject that I have encountered. The modern iteration of air power has its roots back in the mud and blood of World War I, back in the days when glory flew away and returned with clipped wings. It has its foundation in the aggressive tactics of World War II, the tense stare of the Cold War, the slogging bombardments of Vietnam, and the clash of Middle Eastern air forces. World War I brought the airplane to war for the first time. One of the most important developments was the alliance of the machine gun with the airplane, an alliance that proved to be uneasy at the beginning, as the experiences of Royal Flying Corpsman Louis Strange proved. He found himself with a jammed machine gun drum in the middle of air combat, which he tried strenuously to remove. However, his efforts were proving unsuccessful, and he devoted so much time and attention to trying to pull that jammed drum out of his gun that he forgot to fly the airplane, which then flipped over and he fell out of the cockpit. However, he was still holding onto that drum, and he held onto it tenaciously. He said, "At one moment, I was hoping with everything that that drum would come out so I could use my gun again, and the next moment, I was praying that it would never come out." Thankfully for Strange, he was able to regain control of the aircraft. But that demonstrates, again, that at the beginning, air power was no sure thing. Bombing began very primitively, with hand-tossed grenades and steel darts thrown from cockpits. British airman Hugh Trenchard pioneered the use of strategic bombing. He believed that large wings of aircraft could obliterate and pulverize population centers and concentrations of enemy troops. His ideas were at first mocked, but later became widely used, especially in World War II. German Oswald Bock developed a concept we take for granted today, the idea of a wingman, an idea he pioneered with the help of a fellow crewman, a man named Richthal, the Red Baron. World War II redefined and refined the idea of the aggressive tactical use of air power for ground support, as well as redefining the possibilities of strategic bombing. The Luftwaffe, as Hamzi and Boog write in their book, The Luftwaffe, placed complete weight on tactical bombing. This proved to be very detrimental to their efforts towards strategic bombing, as is demonstrated by the Battle of Britain and their failed invasion of Russia. America in the Air War, by Edward Jablonski, relates the compelling story of American might in the air. In Europe, a massive strategic bombing campaign was undertaken, while in the Pacific, as Clark Reynolds describes in detail in The Carrier War, the Army Air Forces assisted the process of island hopping. The Cold War invigorated massive efforts in the United States to ensure peace through strength by maintaining overwhelming air superiority over the Soviet Union. Fighting Jets, written by Bryce Walker, shows how the development of the Strategic Air Command kept at constant readiness, averted war. The Strategic Air Command had bases all over the world, prepared to fulfill their mission at a moment's notice. Vietnam developed pinpoint bombing and ground support to a level hitherto undreamed of. Smart bombs that were able to guide themselves to their targets, were used extensively. Indeed, pilots rarely saw their bombs actually hit the target. Vast amounts of bombs were dropped, and Vietnamese fighters were consistently defeated. But Vietnam illustrated that air power, used within limits, had limits. The Six-Day War, an Israeli-Arab conflict, proved once again the crucial concepts of air power. In Fighting Jets, Walker talks about the devastation that Israeli ground attacks had on Arab ground troops. This success was predicated completely upon air superiority. The Israelis swept the Arab air forces from the sky and then were able to savage the ground troops at will. Israel's use of tactical, strategic, and technological advances, derived from 50 years of lessons learned, proved very decisive. The 850 fighters of the combined Arab forces were no match for the 300 Israeli fighters, according to Bryce Walker. Superior strategy was an Israeli asset. They used surprise to great merit. Superior tactics, demonstrated by the work of Major Erhan Yalo Shavet, who easily defeated conceivably superior MiG-21 fighters through the use of better tactics, as is again told in Walker's Fighting Jets. Superior technology, the ability to fly low and fast, evading radar and anti-aircraft missiles, was very crucial. The stories of the past surround the air forces of the present. Each conflict has refined the shining and flying sword of air power. Georges Guinemer never returned to those sunlit beaches where he had once gazed into the sky. No, one day he took off and never landed. Although the methods and means of maintaining strength in the air have modified and matured, one thing remains very much the same. There are still men in those cockpits, and there are still those who do not land. We must remember the costs of our safety and freedom.